He was quiet but precise, a man more comfortable in engine grease than speeches. Captain Mykola H., call sign Raven, had served 8 years in the 53rd Mechanized Brigade, cutting his teeth in the grinding trench fights of Popasna and Severodonetsk. A T64 BV commander who understood his vehicle like a limb, each bolt, each hydraulic twitch a battlefield surgeon with steel skin and cold tracks. In March 2022, Ukraine's eastern front blurred into a storm. The forests near Serebryanka, once home to summer fishermen and bootleg loggers, had become a corridor of wreckage. Burned-out IFVs, cratered roads, abandoned boots in the mud. The Russians had withdrawn from Kiev, but in the Donbass, the real war had just begun. At 2:37 on April 4th, Mykola's platoon was tasked with a nighttime probe along Route T-513, threading the edge of no man's land. His orders were simple: support infantry scouts pushing through the tree line, mark enemy armor with laser range-finding, do not engage unless provoked. The radio logs show normal comms until 3:11, when Mykola's driver reported engine heat fluctuations, then static. At 3:14, their signal dropped completely. No distress call. No sign-off. Just silence. Attempts to raise the crew on backup channels failed. A drone dispatched at first light found no smoke, no tracks, no wreckage. The unit was gone. Captain Mykola H. and his T64 disappeared in a combat zone, barely 5 kilometers wide, watched by satellites, prowled by UAVs, layered with minefields, and still they vanished like vapor in morning mist. He was 34 years old. His crew, 2 conscripts from Zhytomyr barely out of training. That night, the forest swallowed them. At first light, reconnaissance teams fanned out from the last known coordinates. Forest underbrush was scorched in patches, but not fresh. No tire tracks, no shell casings, no blast crater. Thermal scans from overhead drones showed nothing, just cold earth, blown branches, and a long silence where metal should have glowed. Battalion command assumed a mechanical failure. Maybe the tank had broken down and been towed away by Russian forces. But no movement had been recorded on road surveillance, and no intercepted communications mentioned a captured T64. A second theory emerged: desertion. A full tank crew fleeing in the dark, heading east or south into the gray zones. But Mykola wasn't that kind of soldier. His record was clean. His loyalty unquestioned. His crew had families expecting them home. The theory didn't hold. By the end of the second day, the unit was reclassified MIA, missing in action. The official report noted, loss of contact during low-visibility maneuver, presumed non-hostile incident, investigation pending. But off-record, officers whispered about anomalies. A logistic officer reviewing drone footage noticed something strange. Brief thermal flickers in the swamp west of Grid 14C, too faint for a tank, too regular for wildlife. A UAV was sent, but signal interference spiked. Cameras glitched. What came back was static. A week later, the search was scaled down. Frontline focus had shifted elsewhere. Families were notified. Mykola's mother received a call from a liaison officer. He spoke gently, avoided direct words, said they were hopeful, but that the forest made things difficult. No answers, no graves, just 3 names etched quietly into a backlogged file and a tank that no longer existed. By summer, the front had shifted east. Serebryanka's forests, once vital terrain, were now ghost sectors, tactically irrelevant, operationally forgotten. Vegetation crept back through the craters. Blown trees rotted in place. The charred shell of a BRDM lay half-submerged in river mud, its machine gun long scavenged. Ukrainian units rotated out, Russian positions pulled back toward Lysychansk. What had been a high-contact zone was now just wet silence and rust. With no bodies and no wreckage, the incident faded. The commander's file sat untouched in a desk drawer at Brigade HQ, reviewed only during administrative audits. The battalion chaplain wrote Mykola's name in the memorial book at the base in Bakhmut, but left the death date blank. Some soldiers said nothing because there was nothing to say. Others quietly passed along rumors, the kind that bloom in war's quiet corners. One claimed the tank had veered into a fog bank and was swallowed whole. Another said Russian EW systems had turned the T64's optics inward, blinding the crew before dragging the vehicle off like a caught fish. But the most persistent whisper came from a mortar team who'd spent that spring shelling forest lines west of the Seversky Donets. One night, in low visibility, they heard what sounded like distant treads, slow, deliberate, metallic. But when they fired flares, nothing was there. Just mist over black trees. They stopped talking about it after that. Instead, they gave the place a name, the Swamp, and behind it, the legend, the Swamp took them. It began like all war folklore does, with half-truths, bad memories, and long nights. Some infantrymen spoke of glimpsing turret silhouettes just past the tree line, always at dawn or dusk. One soldier swore he saw a tank idling on a ridge, not moving, not flashing, IR just watching. When he blinked, it was gone. Scouts found no tracks. The ground was undisturbed. Villagers in the floodplain south of the combat zone told stories too. Strange noises in the fog, rhythmic thunder without storm. One described it plainly. It sounded like an engine, old, tired, but still trying to run. Investigators ignored them. The front had moved on, and so had the press. But in late 2023, an independent journalist embedded with a drone recon unit published a short article titled "The Phantom Tank of Donbass." It described a series of anomalies: thermal echoes, machine-shaped shadows in marshland, corrupted GPS signals. The military didn't comment, but the story spread. Online forums dissected it, piecing together Mykola's last known coordinates with unofficial drone clips and archived radio logs. They began calling it Ukraine's ghost tank. Back in Rivne, Mykola's mother kept his uniform pressed, his boots beneath the bench by the door. She refused condolences. "He's not dead," she told anyone who asked. "He's just late." The house smelled like old wood and sun-dried laundry. On the mantel above the cold stove, his portrait watched quietly, flanked by candles that hadn't been lit in months. It was supposed to be a routine survey. In winter 2025, a civilian drone team from an environmental agency was tracking deforestation trends in northern Luhansk Oblast, flying gridded passes over frozen marshland near the Troitsky sector. The drone, a fixed-wing unit outfitted with multispectral sensors, captured a series of frames over an iced floodplain thick with black reeds and snow-pocked water. At first, the anomaly looked like a boulder, maybe a collapsed bridge pylon. But as the drone looped back on a secondary pass, the shape sharpened. Angled plating, cylindrical protrusion, turret. The drone operator marked it in the flight log. Possible submerged vehicle approx. 6x3 meters, Soviet-era profile. They flagged it to their partner, NGO, Ground Trace, a small but well-respected organization that specializes in recovering battlefield remains across eastern Ukraine. Ground Trace reviewed the footage the next day and called in a cross-reference with a private defense contractor. Within 48 hours, they had a tentative ID, a T64 BV, model early 2000s, last known operational near Serebryanka in April 2022. The site was remote 15 kilometers from the nearest paved road and deeper still into waterlogged terrain where even quad bikes struggled. Satellite records from that area were murky. The terrain had changed over the last 3 winters. Old forest roads had collapsed into the swamp. Meltwater had reshaped river paths. The object could have sunk months ago or years. But one detail stood out. The GPS coordinates placed it squarely in a zone once searched, briefly, by drone teams. In early April 2022, the same week, Captain Mykola H. crew had vanished. That was enough to send boots. The military was informed. Permissions were granted. A recovery op was launched. The air was glass cold when the team arrived. The sky hung low, the kind of winter gray that never lifts. The marsh didn't freeze solid in this part of Luhansk. It stayed in a state of soft ice, half-thawed and treacherous. Ground Trace led the operation, supported by engineers from the Ukrainian army and local emergency services. Excavation equipment had to be airlifted in via Mi-8 helicopter. No land vehicle could cross the terrain without sinking. By day 2, they had cleared enough brush and melted surface ice to expose the turret. It was a T64 BV, woodland camouflaged. Its gun barrel snapped near the tip, crushed under weight or time. The tank had sunk at a steep angle, nose down, turret facing west. Its metal was corroded but not destroyed. The serial numbers on the upper glacis plate were still legible under a thin film of mud. They matched the tank assigned to Mykola H in 2022. There were no blast marks, no signs of shell impact or fire. The hatches were sealed. A recovery diver later noted the commander's hatch had been latched from the inside. After 3 days of partial draining and stage stabilization, the hull was raised enough to crack it open. A stink of stagnant water and diesel seeped out. The inside was ruined, flooded, rotted, but intact. And that's when they saw the first boot, still strapped to a skeletal ankle, slumped forward in the gunner's position. Then another in the driver's seat. 2 bodies, no sign of the commander. The hatch opened with a groan, metal grinding against corrosion, releasing a breath of air that hadn't moved in nearly 3 years. The crew stepped back, letting the stench spill out diesel, mildew, rot. When the first light pierced the interior, it revealed a tomb. Water lapped gently against the cabin walls, ankle-deep and stagnant. Mold traced feathered patterns along the insulation. Yet, despite the decay, everything was still in place, like a battlefield diorama trapped under glass. The gunner was the first they found, slumped forward against the sighting assembly, skeletal fingers still curled around the grip. His boots were still on. His helmet had slid down to rest against his ribs. The driver was next sprawled at an unnatural angle beneath the collapsed wiring of the dashboard, skull tilted back as if he'd looked up in his final moment. There were no signs of trauma, no blood, no shrapnel, just death by stillness. The commander's seat was empty, not ejected, not shattered, just vacant. The hatch above had been sealed from within, suggesting someone had left through another route or earlier. Ammo crates lined the side wall, unopened. A rusted first aid kit sat wedged between the battery unit and a soggy MRE pack. Technical manuals, their pages swollen and stuck together, remained tethered with rubber bands on the shelf behind the breech. The engine kill switch was disengaged, no emergency power down, no sign of a hit. Whoever shut the system down did so deliberately, by procedure, not panic. Someone had made a clean exit. Someone who knew the tank better than anyone else. They weren't searching for documents, they were searching for identification. But when one of the engineers pried open the fireproof panel behind the commander's seat, something shifted. A plastic-wrapped bundle slid forward, tucked carefully inside the cavity behind the communications relay. It wasn't standard issue. The bundle contained a small notebook, field gray, water-stained, but still legible in parts. The first pages were mundane: fuel logs, bearing calibrations, a repair note about overheating optics. Then, a change in handwriting, tighter, slanted, less mechanical. The final pages bore short notes, more like fragments. One line repeated twice: low visibility, no nav markers, power cut. Another: driver is freezing. I think I hear it again. The last entry, written alone and larger than the rest, simply read, "Don't follow, the road is cursed." Tucked beside the notebook was a folded piece of paper, damp, torn along the edges, but addressed clearly in Cyrillic, "To Mama." The letter was scrawled in pencil. Much of it had bled into illegibility, but phrases survived. "Sorry I didn't say goodbye," and "Tell Andrei to fix the bike." It ended abruptly, as if interrupted mid-sentence. Investigators assumed it had been written by the gunner or driver before the water rose or something else did. 2 days after the tank was confirmed, the search grid expanded. UAVs scanned outward in concentric loops while dog teams were flown in from Kharkiv. The terrain was still half-frozen, slick, tangled with roots, and cruel to boots. But on the 3rd day, a team flagged something beneath the trees, just over 1 kilometer south of the wreck. A shallow depression beneath a birch cluster held partial human remains, a rib cage twisted under soil, femur shattered, one hand still gloved. Nearby lay a torn jacket, badly faded, the fabric stiff from exposure. On the inner lining, a sewn-on regiment patch, frayed but unmistakable 53rd Mechanized Brigade. The same unit Mykola H. had commanded. His name wasn't on the remains, but the patch didn't lie. A few meters away, embedded in the moss and leaf mulch, they found a rusted wristwatch frozen at 3:19. A collapsed utility pouch held soaked bandages and a broken radio handset. Someone had tried to survive here alone. A forensic team arrived the next morning. The estimate was cautious. Death likely occurred in spring of 2022. No animal predation, no signs of execution. Just exposure, time, and silence. When analysts revisited archived satellite imagery from the area, a missed detail surfaced. On April 5, 2022, a short-lived heat bloom had registered near the same coordinates. It was dismissed, then chalked up to engine residue or thermal clutter from brush fires. No one cross-referenced it. No one followed up. By the time anyone looked again, it was just cold ground and dead leaves. The story should have ended there, with 2 bodies recovered, a 3rd presumed, and a tank pulled from the mud like a relic. But it didn't. Not for the locals. As news of the discovery spread, villagers began to speak more freely. A hunter near the Kaimets forest reported something strange. Fresh tank tracks etched in overnight snow. No vehicle seen. No engine heard. He followed them for 3 kilometers until they simply disappeared at a frozen stream bed, like the machine had lifted off the earth. Another man, an older farmer from Crimea, claimed he'd seen lights moving in the trees weeks earlier, beams that blinked too regularly for wildlife, too slowly for drones. It wasn't Russian. It wasn't ours, he said. It was waiting for something. Journalists picked up the scent. Theories emerged. One writer speculated Mykola had deliberately driven the tank into the swamp, covering tracks and shutting down systems to vanish from both sides. Another floated a darker possibility, that he was fleeing something worse than war, something unseen. Had he lost control of the vehicle? Had he been following a signal no one else could hear? Or was the tank part of a deeper op, something never logged, never meant to be found? The military declined to comment. But off-record, one source close to the recovery operation said quietly, "That tank wasn't abandoned. It was parked." 3 weeks after the tank's recovery, a man was debriefed in Kiev. He was gaunt, recently freed in a POW exchange after nearly a year in captivity. During his medical intake, he mentioned something strange, a memory that wouldn't leave him. He said there was a Ukrainian officer in their holding camp near Krasnoyarchenska. Not just any soldier, a tank commander. Quiet, older than most, walked with a limp, spoke in clipped phrases. Helped 2 other prisoners tunnel through a storeroom beneath the barracks in late 2022. When guards discovered the escape attempt, the others were beaten. The officer was never seen again. The man's description was vague, but a sketch was taken. A liaison recognized the face. They compared it to old ID photos. Close. Too close to ignore. Meanwhile, DNA results returned from the Kyiv lab. The remains inside the T64 confirmed, the driver and gunner, both conscripts listed on Mykola's final roster. The body found beneath the birch roots was inconclusive, too degraded. No usable DNA, but the patch and watch aligned with Mykola's issued gear. Still, the Ministry of Defense held its line. The status file was quietly updated, presumed Dead body unrecovered. No funeral, no grave, just a blank space next to his name on the official memorial board. This year, under heavy sky and flurries of snow, the tank was airlifted to a secure military installation outside Dnipro. Specialists drained it completely, preserving the exterior under a temporary canopy. It would be restored not for redeployment, but for remembrance. Not many machines came back after vanishing for 3 years. Fewer still returned with their stories intact. A joint ceremony was held on the base tarmac. Soldiers stood at attention. Families of the 2 recovered crewmen lit candles, placed letters inside glass urns. A third urn sat empty, marked with Mykola's name and call sign. His mother attended but said nothing. She only touched the tank's cold hull and turned away before the anthem played. Journalists ran the story across outlets. The swamp tank, they called it. Analysts debated the meaning. Was Mykola trying to lead enemies away? Had he broken under pressure? Was this a rogue maneuver, a last stand, or something worse? No one could say for sure. In the final drone footage taken from above, as the site was abandoned, the water creeps slowly back into the crater left by the tank. Ice forms along its edge. The trees creak in the wind. Snow begins to fall. And the swamp, disturbed too long, begins to seal itself again. This story was brutal, but this story on the right-hand side is even more insane.